and welcome to another episode of the Psych Sessions podcast, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld, along with Eric Landrum, your podcast host. In this podcast, we talk about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting areas, which is the and stuff. This is episode 54, where Eric had the opportunity to interview Stacie Spencer, a professor of psychology and the director of the BS in Health Psychology program at MCPHS University. Now, before I give you some of my favorite moments of this interview and some listening tips, I invite you to go to iTunes and leave a rating for the Psych Sessions podcast. It really does help us get onto people's radar. Now, on to the episode. I love when there is a sub-theme in one of the interviews, and I don't even know if it's a sub-theme in this case. Stacie and Eric, they connect over Psychi, though we don't get the backstory of Psychi here and their connection exactly there, but we do hear about their mutual love and expertise in advising, and they do a great job of really emphasizing the importance of student advising. I was fortunate enough to be at an institution, Highline College in Seattle, Washington, where the psych department really emphasized classroom advising and made sure that we were taking care of our students. Now, that was at a community college, and this is advising on a whole other level. Stacie was invited by her current institution to rethink the way advising works, and she has done something really amazing. They are going to discuss critical moments of advising and how that might be developmentally different for different students. And in my experience of teaching students and advising students, this is absolutely true. Some students are going to be fine. They get it. They have the family background, mentors or parents who've gone to college, and they get the questions to ask, and they know where they're going and how they're getting there. And then there are other students who have no clue, and those students may get it quickly, maybe in the first year of their college experience, but they may not get it until later on. So what Stacie has done is created a system, a sequence, where these students get what they need in advising while they are completing their psych major. It is so good. One of the things that Stacie talks about that I appreciated was that you don't need to be a career expert on everything to run a good advising and careers course. What this meant to me is that you have to be a good teacher, and good teachers can teach this course in an effective way. And from what I understand, she runs and facilitates an amazing learning experience for students that is centered around career and advising. It's about shaping student knowledge and scaffolding the learning, and I think she does a really great job of it. For those of you who are like Eric and might be rethinking a careers and advising course at your institution, you're going to want to get together with Stacie and discuss this. I also noted in this interview something that I've been thinking about for a long time, but which really resonated with me in hearing Stacie talk about her own experiences in college. We should all know our advising stories. I don't mean the advising we've done with students. I mean reflect upon how we learned what we learned about the college experience, about what careers were available out there. If we had a good advising experience, we should know that so that we can help students. And if we had a poor advising experience, that should fuel us to give students a better advising experience. One of my favorite moments in this interview is when Stacie reflects on her mother, an intelligent, amazing woman who looked through all the degree program options that Stacie had at her college and looked down the list and said, I don't know what you can do with any of these degrees except this one, computer science. And so Stacie and Eric riff a little bit about that. What is most exciting about this interview is that we all have something to learn from Stacie Spencer. Whether you are classroom advising or whether you are thinking about overhauling the way that you do this at your four-year institution, Stacie has some expertise that you are going to hear throughout this episode, which you will be able to apply to your context. So enjoy this episode. Here's Stacie and Eric.
I am thrilled to be recording another Psych Sessions episode. I'm here with Stacie Spencer at ACT, Annual Conference on Teaching. Your school, I would say the name of your school, but the name of your school is now an acronym for what the name used to be.
Correct.
And
you
so
have good
it's
memory.
it's something like, let me see if I can get it right, because you can see the copious notes I have in front of me.
Yes, I've heard of these copious notes, and now I get to see
In the
them.
preparations that I've done and the advanced planning that we did, scheduling this months in advance to have this hour together.
Yes. 5 minutes ago was awesome.
Thank you for being so flexible. MPHUSPH, something like that.
Very close. It starts with an M.
Okay, so where are you? What university do you teach at?
MCPHS University. It is not abbreviated. It's not an acronym. It's MCPHS University, formerly known as.
AKA.
No, we say FKA, formerly known as.
What's the difference?
AKA
Also
is
known
known as, but no, we are formerly known as. But we could go on a tangent. Admissions still uses the original name.
So you are a psychologist teaching at a pharmacy and health sciences school.
And it's awesome.
All right. But is there a department of psychology?
There is an undergraduate degree program that is health psychology.
Health psychology?
Yes.
So they get a bachelor's degree in health psychology?
Correct.
So, and is there any other specialization, or that's it?
That would be it.
So, we're going to meander, and so it's been a long conference, and I got you, and I know you. So for the listeners, Stacie's going to be really patient with me because I think she likes me, and so she'll forgive me for meandering. But do you think that health psychology baccalaureate is an advantage compared to, let's say, other Boston schools that are cranking out bachelor's degree recipients in psychology?
I think for the students who have an interest in health, it's an advantage. I think by being in our program, there are other advantages that are not connected to the health part.
Right.
And the way we deliver our curriculum. I think, no other school as an undergraduate would you have so many courses in psychology that are health specific.
Right. But I'm just thinking about if you're trying to differentiate yourself, if you're trying to stand out from the crowd, one way to do it would to have a degree that is not the prototypical, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology.
Right.
I have a bachelor's degree in health psychology. That alone is a difference maker. And first off, I know you well enough, and I've heard you give enough talks. I completely agree that what you do in your program is you could call it a bachelor's degree in whatever, and it would still be different and unique and special, even if it was called a bachelor's degree in psychology.
Thank you.
So I think we'll get to the origin story in a bit, because that's what we kind of tend to do. But would you mind kind of walking our listeners through, you have a very unique way of talking about assessment, talking about orientation. I'm sorry, I meant advising. Talking about advising and orientation. You don't do it in one shot at the beginning of a semester or the beginning before they get to school. You've actually embedded it throughout the entire 4-year curriculum. Would you mind kind of giving an overview and the philosophy of how your school does it that way?
So our school is different from our program.
Okay.
Sort of. Our school, every student takes that first semester course that some places call first year seminar. We used to. And then it became Introduction to the Major, which was, I think, a brilliant shift. Every student comes into our school having declared a major. And I have strong mixed feelings. In any day you can ask me, I'll say, well, that's great, and then that's awful, because developmentally I don't think students are ready to make that kind of a commitment. So there's that piece. For me, the health psych major originated, the person who created Ed Krupat, wonderful person, he hired me, and then he left to go down the street to Harvard Medical School. And they created the major and a couple of others for the students who chose not to continue in pharmacy. And it was brilliant because it obviously fit some of the interests of students who said, this pharmacy thing isn't for me. Or I thought it would be more patient counseling, and I'm not seeing it that way as much as I would have liked. But they didn't directly recruit all that hard for health psych majors, and it's still a very difficult recruitment piece. How do you get students to go to a specialized school to be a psych major, even though it's a
Right.
health psych major? So what does that mean to the person interested in psychology to come to this school? So it is, if you're interested in health, and maybe it's health psychology, maybe it's traditional clinical psychology, which most students think that's what psychology careers are. If you're thinking you want to go to med school, what's the advantage to coming to MCPHS? And I think we have many, and hopefully we'll get to some of those. But I realized pretty early on that there's an identity problem and that my students were feeling like second-class citizens, which is strange for me because I had been at large universities with very large psych departments, and my academic position before MCPHS was the University of Pittsburgh. And I was hired as the director of advising / lecturer
Okay.
after 2 postdocs in behavioral medicine. So it's a very interesting shift in my career at that point. It's also how I know Jamie McMinn. I hope you're listening, Jamie.
We'll make him listen.
Yes, he was a graduate student at the time.
So before you go, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm going to give you a chance to take a drink. So would you say in your shop, it's hard to recruit? What's the number one major at your university? The most popular major?
Pharmacy. Second is we actually have a pre-medical and health studies major.
So,
but it's a major.
And I mean, and we know each other well enough. I mean this with no disrespect. Is psychology seen as a fallback major? So if one can't succeed in pharmacy, it's the secondary choice, or are you seeing students are coming to your school and that's their psychology is their first choice, and they are coming there because of the outstanding program, or I'm sure it's probably a mix of both?
Both.
Okay.
Both. I would say half of my majors are the ones that came looking for it. They may not have known exactly what it was, but they liked that. And the other half are coming from a lot of majors, other majors. And they're always welcome.
Of course. Yeah. I'm sorry, but I guess that's meaningful to me because we have a lot of students at Boise State who want to be nursing majors, and psychology becomes a second choice. Now, I think they become very satisfied with that, but it wasn't. They kind of see it as maybe fallback's not the right term, but it wasn't their first choice, or they wanted to be biology majors, or they wanted to be something else. And they sometimes think that psychology is going to be easier, and they get into it and they go, "Really, you're making me take all this anatomy and physiology, and I got to take 2 4-course sequences, and 8 credits of math and all this." And so, anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you talking about the advising sequence.
Right. So at some point, I said well, first of all, I was having too many one-on-one appointments with students talking about careers, and I thought this is inefficient. I'm happy to have those, but I'd like them to have a little bit more knowledge before those appointments so that we can really get to what they want and not me spending time covering the bases. So I said, well, I'm going to develop a career seminar series. So I took a 3 credits worth of a course, and I said, we're going to split that into 1 credit each. And so credit total to graduate, we just sacrificed a general elective and said this is worthwhile. And, I thought, well, originally, I would have them meet in the same room. So whether we call it BEH 101, 102, 103. Someone made me realize later it should have been 101, 201, 301, but it doesn't matter. So I said, well, I'm going to have them in the same room, and I'm going to give them different tasks. And as they progress through it, they get to hear from each other about what they're discovering that they want to do. And so because there's so many interests, and when you have fewer students, the interests from year to year change. So I wanted them to hear lots of different things. We've changed that. Now they're separated. I couldn't handle it. Just the cognitive overload of trying to balance that out and make sure every week for 50 minutes, everyone's getting something out of it. So we changed that. Now,
so I'm sorry. I keep interrupting you because there's interesting things happening at every step. So did you have to? How hard was it to persuade your colleagues to do that? Take a 3-credit elective and turn it into really?
Yes. Well, they trust me.
Well, but
they didn't. Let's be honest. If I'm taking care of that course, we don't have enough majors to need more than 1 section at a time. So if Stacie Spencer is willing to do it, by all means, do it.
But what happens when you go on a sabbatical or if you take a leave of absence? Will there be someone to step in?
Well, I did go on a sabbatical, and we just put it off for a semester till I came back. And then but that was back when they were in the same section. So they just waited a semester to take it.
But it's all on you, though.
It is, but I love it.
I know. Oh, okay. All right.
I love it. And I think one thing that we need to work on is I'm not the end all be all of career knowledge. And I think my colleagues, I think my colleagues sometimes want to kind of step back and say, you've got that. You've got that. We don't have to worry about it. And I get frustrated because they'll say, you have something different to offer, and they need lots of perspectives. So, yeah. Then when we split it into separate courses, I had them starting in the spring of their second year. And then it would go the fall of the next year and the spring of their third year, thinking, okay, now they're done by their senior year. We don't call them freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors.
What do you call them?
First year, second year, third year, fourth year, because this is the pharmacy influence. Pharmacy is a 6-year program. You can't call them freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors. Then what do you call them?
Because you don't have a name. You don't have a name for 5 and 6.
Yeah. So now everyone is first year, second years.
Okay.
No matter what the program is. So that wasn't really working because we'd get to the end of the third year. I do all of the, now you're applying to graduate school, you're going to apply for jobs. And they were back in my office, all in a panic, individually, in the fall of their fourth year. I said, no, we need to move this. We need to do this all together, which is a challenge because, deadlines for applications are different times for different types of programs. And some of them still are thinking I'm going to apply, but I'm not sure if I'm going to apply. And then how do you support the ones who are clearly going the graduate school route at the same time the ones who are going to be applying for jobs right away? But I love the challenge. It's okay.
Well, and I think you struck on something. I think your colleagues are lucky because you have taken a deep dive into this. And I've told you this privately, and this is a great way to tell you this publicly. You're one of the few people in the country that I believe has taken a truly deep dive in this notion about careers and postgraduate plans and taken it seriously and thoughtfully and taken an evidence-based into the literature. I think Eric Amsel at Weber State thinks about it this way. I think there's a handful of others. Maybe I could count them all on one hand. And so, but the risk is, what if someone lures you away from there? I worry sometimes about it, just as a general thing. Let's say at my school there's a diversity requirement, and it's satisfied by a course. If someone over there, so if I don't have to worry about diversity because there's some course over there that takes care of it, then sometimes that topic gets marginalized, and I don't have to worry about it. And my colleagues may be the exact same way. We have a Psych 120 course. We don't do it as well as you guys do, but if I don't have to talk about careers, or if Eric knows all the stuff about careers here, then I don't have to learn about it. And I think that's just a risk when we over-rely on one colleague for any level of expertise. So it's a 3-course sequence.
In addition to that one course, Introduction to the Major. So I get 4. I get a course every year. And it really feeds into this notion. And I don't know how people just do a 1-course career course.
You can't imagine the world in any other way.
I can't, because they're developing. It's career exploration. They're exploring, and professional development. They're developing, and they're happening in sort of different sequences and combinations, for different students. So some are, I really have no clue, and others are, I really know. And so I can pick some things to develop, but other students, well, I'm not quite sure, so I'm going to try some things. But that's the beast. And so for me, I can meet all of those needs. And I don't tell them about careers. I have them explore. I genuinely will say, here are the tasks. And my students are very funny, because obviously if I'm the only one, by that 3rd or 4th year, they're pretty comfortable with me.
Right.
And they will say things and know that it's okay. And my favorite thing they often say is, I was sitting there doing one of your assignments, and I thought, oh, that Dr. Spencer. And then they're done, and they say, oh, she was right again. And because I push them to think about things that they just want to be lazy, or to be fair, they're busy studying
Right.
and learning in other courses, and this
Right.
is a 1-credit course. And anyone who teaches 1-credit courses knows you're up against all those other courses. Where does this fit in their priorities? And I say to them, this should be the most important course to you because this is all about you.
Right.
But I give them assignments, and they're fun to create, where they're really thinking about themselves, but they're connecting it to what they want to do. They are not fans of the APA goals, and you and I have talked about this, where I've said we need a student-friendly version because I want them to read those and tell me, where are you? Where are you? Not in something that's so structured that feels like assessment to them or an evaluation form, but tell me where you are. Tell me which ones you need to keep working on, and then what's the plan? How are you going to work on those, or which ones do you need to work on most now or next semester, and what are the courses or the experiences that will allow you to do that?
Well, and the nice thing about the model that you have there is that you do get to know the students. You know, if there was a handoff that someone else was going to teach the next semester, they wouldn't have that continuity of what did you do 2 semesters ago in your third year or your second year. And so it must be small enough that you can handle that.
But they actually could know where a student is because I use OneNote. Do you know OneNote?
I do.
So with OneNote, we use Office 365, and so I can use the class notebook. And the class notebook is brilliant, and I'm not quite sure how I stumbled on it, but I absolutely love it. So when my students come into my major, let's say they're incoming first years, they're in that year of graduation notebook. And it's set up where there's 4 sections. One they can't see, that's the teacher-only space, where that's like my staging area. But I can distribute assignments through that to their individual sections of the notebook. Then there's the section that's a collaborative space, kind of like a wiki space. If they were working in groups, they can just go there. I can restrict access to different groups if I want to, or just have it open to everybody. And then there's I don't know what they call it, we'll call it the library, where I can put out resources they can't touch, they can't manipulate. And so that means that notebook is where they're putting all of these posts, reflections, items, updated resumes, their self-assessments go in there. And then at any point I can say, go back and look, and now tell me where you are. But so if someone were to have to step in or want to step in, which they'd have to fight with me over it, but they could then come in as an instructor, and they can see every student's section. And I love it. If you were in my office, you'd see everyone kind of jokes, I'm the queen of the notebook. So what I love about OneNote is it is that, for me, that image of a 3-ring binder. And then in the back, I have all these sections, and each section is a student, and within their section are all of the sections I've created.
So you're using OneNote as your portfolio system.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Stacie, you said before you got there, what was your experience? It was in academic advising?
It was, so the University of Pittsburgh system was central advising until you declare your major, and then each department had their own advising office. And depending on the size, influenced how many staff advisors. So I was the director/lecturer. And then I had 2 staff advisors, an associate director and, we'll say, assistant director. There were the 3 of us.
Is that where you got your interest in career development for students, or did you go there with that interest?
Well, I was hired to do that. I always wanted to be a faculty member. I went to graduate school to be a professor.
Okay.
And I think because of my own experiences, I thought a lot about students need this. We didn't get it. I mean, I think anyone we would talk to, of our friends in teaching psychology would say, no one, maybe I had a one-on-one conversation and it felt like a fluke. It wasn't organized. It wasn't systematic. And so I had this incredible opportunity at Pitt where they wanted someone to really develop an advising system that also brought a sense of cohesion to a department that's a phenomenal department. I felt so fortunate to have had the opportunity to work there amazing researchers who also were great teachers. They had graduate students, but they recognized at the time it was between 700 and 800 majors. It was a lot.
Wow.
And their advising at that point was about registration and maybe some connections to finding people to do research with, but that was really it. And while I was there, I started thinking more and more and more about what this could be. What do they need? And I thought in terms of workshop series. So there's the workshop series for those who aren't going to go to graduate school, and there's the workshop series for those who are. Instead of just saying today's workshop is, and being really mindful that I knew without the numbers, few are going to graduate school, many are going out into the workforce. And back to the sense of identity, I believe in pride. Mm-hmm. You may have seen this pride of ownership piece I wrote in Ion Psychi that came from something I presented at Western Psych Association. And I really, that sense of who am I in this and what does this major mean for my future? Because I'm always sad when I hear people say I'm not doing anything with my major. Mm-hmm. And I understand why they say that, but I want to change that. So me leaving Pitt was not that I wanted to leave Pitt. It was about, it was a family decision. I moved around a lot in my first marriage following someone's career, and I was just really grateful for all the great experiences I had at each stop. And I always wonder what would it have been like to have stayed there. But the MCPHS opportunity has allowed me to grow in really incredible ways and made me think about things that being tucked in a psych department, I wasn't probably going to think about.
Well, and that's why I asked, because most of our colleagues, and it's not right or wrong, it just is what it is, don't think about advising in the career paths of our majors like you and I do. Mm-hmm. And they certainly don't think about the career paths of workforce psychology graduates like you and I do. And so I was just, and when I heard that piece about that you'd had academic advising experience, I'm figuring that's probably the source.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go to origin stories here in a minute, but I'm pretty sure we've talked about this, or you've had the misfortune of being in an audience where I've rambled on about something. I go around talking about, so this critical window, there's this critical window for language acquisition. So we I don't know what it is exactly, 3 to 5 or whatever. It's harder for adults to learn a foreign language than it is for kids, because it just, I think, I have no data to support this. I think there is a critical window for the acquisition of advising information. And so I think there's a point in time when students are ripe for hearing about their future, their career, their self-reflection. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm going to let you respond to that in just a second. We deliver it in a course called Psych 120. It's at one point in time. There are a handful of students who hear it, they get it, they sign up to be an RA right away. I'm teaching a capstone class right now, and all of a sudden people are saying, how come you never told us this? And I gently say, we made you take a required course. And what I love about the model that you described is that maybe that freshman year, they're not in the critical window, but you get them 3 more times.
Right. And, we could think of it a couple different ways. Sign up when you're ready. But I don't really want to do it that way, because they have the benefit of seeing others in their cohort. And maybe for some of them that's daunting, because those people seem so sure about what they want to do. But I think it gives them lots of examples. And I try to create an atmosphere where it's okay. It's okay not to know yet, but I'm always going to push you to look at something. And the other thing I really push them to do is I make them look at bachelor's level jobs, master's level jobs, and doctoral level jobs. And I don't care if you plan to get a PhD or not. Right. You're going to look at master's level jobs, and you're also going to look at bachelor's level jobs. And they don't have to be in that profession you have in mind. I also have an assignment. They have to create a career poster in the 101 course, and they have to compare and contrast that career with 2 others. So we have pre-PT, pre-physical therapy, pre-occupational therapy students that come through our major. They can choose a couple of other majors, but health psych is one of them, which I absolutely love. And, I'll say to them, maybe one of those careers would be the other. So if you're pre-PT, you do PT as the center and you compare it to OT. And I'll tell you why, is because when you interview, you want to make sure you can distinguish between the two. But you could do something else. I don't care. It could be anything that you're maybe thinking about. And I had one of the most interesting ones was a student who had artist, lawyer, and maybe psychologist. I can't remember the third one. You'd think I'd remember that. But I was so impressed that she went way off in different, what people would think are different directions, but they have to connect it to the APA goals, what employers want. So they have to learn about what does it take to succeed in that particular career area. So one thing I have to mention is I feel very strongly about when we talk about careers with students, we use that interchangeably with occupational titles. That's fine, careers and occupations. But the truth is our bachelor's level students are going to get jobs with job titles. And job titles are not pretty. Job titles are not the kinds of things that you say I went to college for. I didn't go to college to be a student support specialist too.
Right.
Or an administrative assistant or coordinator. And a lot of employers use that, and then it's the description that makes it pretty cool. So I make my students look I like Indeed. I send them to Indeed, and they have to put in the word bachelor's, and they have to keep going until they find 3 that are interesting. If I had OCD, my number's 3. My students know this. It's always going to be 3. So one time, this was the greatest, one of those great teaching days. I almost took a picture of it and tweeted it out, but you'll notice I don't tweet anything out. I said, okay, let's go around there. I'm going to write on the whiteboard, tell me the names of these jobs. And I wrote everyone's 3. And there were maybe 5 duplicates, 5 that came up more than once. And I said, look at this. And I said, which ones do you think are the same thing? Because they had to bring the descriptions with them too. Read those descriptions and let's see. See, this same thing can have 2 different names, or these are variants of the same thing. So if you use your keyword search strategies, it doesn't really help. It doesn't help you to put something very specific in because now you're going to narrow yourself. And I say, do not put psychology in that search box.
And that is the blessing and the curse, as we both understand, is that even there could be similarities, but I'll bet on those boards there were wide differences. And, I've gotten to telling psychology majors, it's not that you can't do anything with a bachelor's degree in psychology. It's that you can do almost anything, but the thing is there's nothing unique to a bachelor's degree in psychology that someone with a bachelor's degree in sociology or social work or criminal justice or English, depending on the job. And I know you know this, but maybe some listeners will take something away from that.
Right. If anyone's going to do a course like this, you need to bring your alumni in. And I'm going to tell you 2 stories that, if I cry, there's no tissues, but I'll try not to get on the microphone. I'll use my sleeves.
No, I have a handkerchief in my backpack because I was ready for the Charles Brewer session yesterday, just in case. Yeah.
So one student who's come in repeatedly did a little ABA work in her senior year, and then continued with that. And the company she worked for paid part of her graduate degree, so she has a master's in ABA. But at the same time, she was looking around and she got a job as an health IT specialist. So she was hired by a company that was creating a new platform for medical records and communication in a health system. And they hired her. And she tells students, this is my dream, to have my students actually be able to articulate this. She said, it's on you to tell them what you bring to the table.
That's right.
And they love the fact that I came from MCPHS University, had health in the name. They were looking for someone who was going to help them on the user end. That's the person part. So my background in health, all the courses that I had about health, everything I knew about people, but it was on me to tell them. And now she is a consultant. So she worked for a company, and now she's her own independent consultant. She graduated I was on sabbatical, 2011.
Well, and what's interesting is that what your story reminded me of is that we don't help our students tell their own stories about their own skill set. I'm going to tell you a really quick one, but it's not, and I can't take credit for it.
Go ahead.
It's my colleague Brian Stone at Boise State. He's teaching a class right now where part of his final exam will be from this course, Tell me what you can put on your resume.
Yes.
And he's going to grade those because he wants his students to make a direct connection from what they did in the course to what are marketable skills and abilities.
But I'm doing that, and that's awesome because I like hearing other people are doing it, but that's what I'm doing in every semester of this course is back to APA goals, what employers want. And I'm fortunate enough to be on the CABE working group that identified the skills that are now, at this conference, there are handouts. We call it a poster. It should be a poster. I love this, but really going through all of the employer surveys, what are you looking for in a resume? What do you value? What are the things that you expect new employees to have? And all of those studies. And everyone's saying the same thing, and it aligns very, very well with the APA goals. Who's surprised? Because the team that put together 2.0, rock stars, they knew what they were doing. So,
most of them.
Well, you can speak to that. I won't. But
I was trying to be funny.
yes,
all but one.
Yes,
yeah.
all but one.
Right.
Yeah,
there's always an N minus
clearer,
one.
I understand.
Yeah.
So who's the standard deviate? Is that what?
That'd be me.
Right.
Yeah.
So
let's make that clear.
Right. Just constantly having students think about what are you doing? What are you doing? And so they're building that evidence. We talk about behavioral interviewing. So, the STAR approach, and they love doing those activities. I think that's one of their favorite ones is when I explain what that method is of describing a behavior in response to a question. And the first time I did it was fun because I had them in pairs and I asked. So I said, answer one of these questions for me that I had on the board, talk with each other, and then I asked them to share. So when I pointed to this one pair, it wasn't this, I asked a particular student, but his partner gave his answer. And it turned out to be brilliant. And I realized it was easier for his partner to describe what he had said. And it meant that he was listening when that person described a situation and talked about the actions that he took and the results of what he did. And so I've used that method ever since, but they really enjoy that. That, I think, is easier for them when I say, so go through the APA goals and tell me what you've accomplished so far. But, addressing those kinds of questions, they start to really feel it. But I save that. That's the last course in the sequence. So I think all of this preparation and priming has set them up for that.
So I just want to circle back because I don't get to talk to an expert like you every day. I wish I could. So, and I'm not looking for confirmation. Do you think it's an accurate this notion of window, this critical window, or is that not a good analogy? Help me.
I think it varies from student to student when they're ready. So I think each person might have that window. But that's why I have to have a sequence. And that's what I've worried about with people. Like, that person's not going, I think stages of readiness for change, very much the trans-theoretical model.
Yeah.
You have them show up and you say, this is the time, you're a new major, take this course.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you everything, but they're not ready. There's a lot going on, and we don't know for each student what's going on.
That's what I worry about. If you required at one point, and we've been talking at Boise State about what if we could just have some drop-in modules. We get stuck in this idea that because we've told them once, we've told them,
right.
And our hands are washed. And hey, I told you that one time about careers, and I told you about the opportunities to what you get from being a TA and RA, and so if that critical window idea is correct, which I don't know that it is, then I want to know predictability. So I want to know when are you, this is probably not a good way to say it, vulnerable or open's better, open to hearing about careers and reflecting deeply about what you want to do and who you are. Then I want to be able to drop in the content and all the amazing exercises that I know that you do in that sequence. And so,
well, then if it's only one course, do you let them decide when to register for it?
No, we don't.
No,
because we don't have the
someone,
flexibility.
Would that then respond right? And that becomes a very difficult enrollment management piece.
Right.
And then you hit what I was feeling is like, then there's a mad sprint to the end,
well,
right? That they're going to graduate and they're running out of time. And you're like, well, if you had started earlier, you could have been thinking about volunteer opportunities and internship opportunities and setting goals for these little things. And I can tell when they come back and they haven't done anything to meet the goals, but my students I think I'm getting better with the course. And I think there's a point at which they kind of get on board. And they're the ones who put a lot into responding to prompts, and those are the ones who give me the bare minimum. And I see the bare minimums change when they're finally ready to do that. So the assignments allow for that variation. You don't have to know a lot. But I have to go back myself to faculty who are afraid of career advising and mentoring are worried that they have to know every job out there
That's
that
right.
they have to know all careers, but you don't if you set it up so that it's assisting them through that exploration process. Your job is to help them negotiate the problem solving and maybe to scaffold that. Maybe that's what I'm doing is I'm kind of scaffolding them through this process and just giving them just enough nudge and support at the same time, but I don't have to know everything.
But I would imagine that, I think you're exactly right. And I think that most faculty members don't even know the nudge and support.
Right.
That's the piece that's missing.
Yes.
So I'm gonna go to origin story because we typically do this oftentimes. And so, mom and dad go to college. Are you a first generation college student? Was it in your home growing up? Was it if you're going to college, or was it always what college are you going to go to?
My parents met at the Pentagon. They joined the Air Force rather than go to college. Okay. And they got married. They both left the Air Force. They worked in computers. That's a very important detail in my life. They both were assigned to computers. So this is 1950. So if you can imagine what the room looked like, or the rooms
that's right,
of computers. And I honestly don't know what their tasks were. But I can tell you that when they left, my father went down that path of computers. He worked for IBM for a while. He went to UCLA on the GI Bill. In, what did I figure out? 6 years, they had their first 4 kids. I'm number 5. I came 5.5 years later.
You're 5 of 5?
Yeah.
Well, we'll circle back to that in a minute.
Right. So technically, yes, my father went to college.
Sure.
But it wasn't a traditional college experience the way we'd think of it. And when I was 3, my parents divorced. So he was not in my life in that influence of the parent who went to college. So I was raised by this amazing woman. I'm so happy to get to talk about my mom. Think about this woman who left Fayetteville, North Carolina by way of the Air Force and had born and raised Fayetteville, North Carolina, right next to Fort Bragg. Couldn't join the Army because apparently her parents wouldn't have liked her to have been a woman in the Army at that time. I'm not saying anything about women in the Army. I'm just saying that's how she tells the story, is the Air Force was new. And so there was no idea of what that would be like. So she, then gets married and has 4 kids right away. And when my father, because he worked for IBM, they traveled around the country. IBM, people joked, I've been moved. They used to say that's what it stood for. Very good. And so they did a lot of moving, and they happened to settle back in Maryland, and then they got divorced. So I was the only person who lived in the same house for my 18 years before I went to college. I have 1 sister, 3 older brothers, and my sister went to college, and I was 9 when she started college, and I fell in love with college when we moved her into that dorm, because I loved everything about it. I loved the way it looked. I mean, sounds silly. Maybe I liked the way it smelled. I don't know, but I liked the way it felt. I just felt this thing. I don't know what it was, but I wanted that image. I ended up going to Allegheny College.
So in the sequence, is the older sister the oldest of 5?
No. Second oldest.
So the oldest brother go to college?
Well, he did. He went to UNLV.
Okay, but you didn't move him in. But
I didn't move him
it's
in.
the sister's experience that sticks with you.
And also, my mother treated her daughters very differently than her sons. And part of it was because of her own life experiences, but also I think she's a single mom with 5 kids. Think about this. From the age of 3 to 14, that was the age range. She's got 4 kids, 2 definitely going into that teenage stage of life. So, education was really important for her daughters to have so that we weren't vulnerable.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that the attitudes that might have prevented her from having the opportunities from her parents, she was bound and determined to not let those attitudes affect her daughters.
But I have to tell you something amazing about my mother, and this affects me in the way I think about the career exploration and professional development. I feel very strongly you do not have to go to college to be smart.
Right. I agree.
And so let me tell you what my mom did. So she's now divorced. She's got a 3-year-old. She has to go back to work. She got a job with the federal government. It was health, education, and welfare, now Health and Human Services. And she was a programmer. She was a systems analyst. Her title when she retired was systems analyst. My mother could program in, 6, 7, 8 different languages. When I visited my mother at work, I saw diversity. I grew up thinking diversity of, there were men, there were women, there were different ethnicities, different sexual orientation. And that was all right there for me. And I was always, people would say you're naive because white girl privilege. And I grew up in crazy. She kept us in this upper middle class neighborhood. I didn't know it was upper middle class until I left. Mm-hmm. She kept us there. And I said, Mom, if money's so tight, why don't we move? And she said, because I want you here. I want you to go to this high school. I want you to have this life experience. And it was like the show The Wonder Years. Ride your bike to school, It was very safe and wonderful and really interesting people. Very much the suburbs, the typical 1960s suburban environment. But I saw, and it never occurred to me that someone couldn't be capable of what I called a smart job. I considered my mom's job a smart job because it required a lot of thinking and problem solving. I just knew that, a lot of logic. And she never talked about work, really. She got up, she went to work, she came home, she made us dinner every night. We had dinner together every night. A lot of the parents that I know now are like, wait, what? Stop by and pick something on the way home. But she did all of those things. But again, I saw all of these people and I thought, well, why wouldn't somebody be able to do a smart job? But I also, one of my brothers is an architect. He's the one next in line next to me. He's an architect. He was a contractor for a while. Now he's a builder and an architect. And it's just really, it's interesting, kind of that difference in what our experiences were. I lost my train of thought on what the importance of Scott was in that story, but it's just, she really wanted us to be. She let us do whatever we wanted to do, and that brother kind of came to school later. He went off on a motorcycle, came back 2 years later and said, I'm ready to go to school. I figured it out. I know what I want to do. And that was really what he planned to do, is I don't know what I want to do yet. She was incredibly supportive of all of that. And so, but it was definitely different for her daughters. My sister also has a PhD, by the way.
In?
Education.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So Thanksgiving and Christmas are really interesting times when you get together?
We don't talk. My sister and I really don't talk about what we do.
Okay.
Oh, it's interesting just because we're cast of characters. We're family, and we're very, very different personalities.
Is your mom still with us?
Yes.
Okay, so do the 6 of you gather, and 5 sibs plus her?
Well, I would say on a regular basis it's 3 plus her, but that's just because the brother who went to Vegas, he's on the West Coast, and so we see him at different times. Plus, it's not a regular thing. But yes, we're very tight.
Size of family, it makes it hard to travel sometimes.
I see my sister a few times a year, my brother. My mother lives with my brother, Scott, the one I was talking about, the architect and builder. And so I see them a lot. We're pretty tight.
So we were doing the origin story retrospective, and so you in high school, you're going to go to college. Is that a given?
I thought everyone was going to college because of where I went to school.
Right.
I mean, I grew up right outside of the D.C. Beltway. I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, specifically Potomac, Maryland, and I just thought that's what why wouldn't people want to, if you think about it, I'm 9 years old thinking, I'm going to college. So it never occurred to me somebody wouldn't want to go, even though my brothers didn't. I know what I was going to say about my brothers. This is the thing. Because my brother started off as a contractor while he was in architecture school, he had his own business. I had another brother who was an incredible painter, and by that I mean, wall painter, house painter.
Right.
And I value that skill. And I always say to people, it's not a waste if someone got a degree in art history and they became a plumber or a painter. Right. I think that's pretty cool. That's interesting. I want to talk to that person. Yeah, and they have nothing to do with each other. And if they had, I consider a luxury, if they had the luxury of doing both, that's wonderful for them. And, my brothers are all very bright individuals who could have done a lot of things.
Right. You can be bright no matter you went to college or not.
That's
you can be bright whether you've got a 4.0 GPA or a 2.0 GPA.
But my mom probably couldn't get the job that she retired from now because she doesn't have those 2 letters after her name, except if she had stayed longer and had done those tasks in the Air Force. Right. That would have been the difference for her, but actually having the opportunity. The other thing about that is she was trained. And I talk a lot about education versus training. Mm-hmm. Our bachelor's degree is about educating and providing the transferable skills. We are not training students to do things. And I talk about that in our open house admission events to explain to parents, this MCPHS University, if you go to the School of Pharmacy, they're going to educate and train. If you go to nursing, they're going to educate and train. Here in arts and sciences, you may think we're not doing as much, but we're educating and we're creating lots of opportunities for what you may want to do.
That's a great way to think about it. That's just a fantastic way to think about it. That's why we can't nail down the job that you're going to go do with your bachelor's degree. It's not training. And the other piece of it is I talk to students about the military. I think is an excellent option for a lot of students because you will get great training and you will come out with transferable skills, or you can stay in as a career. Right. And I have no problem with that. So you go to high school and you're looking at colleges.
Well, think about it. I mean, this is where I think being that first generation college student, I don't know what makes me different, and I bristle a little bit when I hear people refer to us as first gens, because I feel I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm a little conflicted over this. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that we might recognize that different kinds of students have different needs, but they're not all the same.
That's true.
And I never wanted a label. I had to grow up with a label of, we were the first ones in the community whose parents were divorced. I didn't want to be that kid of the divorced parents. I don't want to be the first gen. I don't want to be the female this. I don't want to be the, whatever it might be. But I think that's one of those moments where she had no idea. And I think my sister must have figured it out on her own. Mm-hmm. My sister went to Guilford College in North Carolina. It was 5 hours away. I thought, okay, that's going to be my circle. That didn't feel like she was too far away. So I can go maybe up 5 hours. I ended up at Allegheny College. Don't know how.
Mm-hmm. That's in Pennsylvania?
Northwest corner of Pennsylvania, between Pittsburgh and Erie. Okay. Greatest life-changing experience.
Small private liberal arts?
Yes.
Okay. And when you go there, you declare your major as?
Well, they wanted us, this is a funny story, they wanted us to identify our interests, but don't declare, but we need to give you an academic advisor. So I'm sitting at the kitchen table, and I think about this often with my own students. I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the list. My mom's making dinner, and I said, they want me to pick, I don't know. I have no idea. She comes over, looks at the list. She says, I don't know what any of these things turn into for jobs. So here it is in my mind.
Wait. Yeah. You're sitting at the kitchen table. You're 17, 18 years old. You know you're going to Allegheny. Or maybe, okay. And
so
you're already thinking about what do these things turn into for
my mother. My mother comes to look at the list, and she said, not me.
Okay.
But
here
this is the influence, right? And she says, I don't know. And she says, except one. Computer science, which made sense. So here's what's funny, and this is so me at that time. I said, okay, but can I also pick math? I like math. She's like, Stacie, I don't care what you check. I'm just saying that's the only one that I know. And I had taken a computer class in high school, and I hated it. So I go off to Allegheny, and my advisor is a math professor, and that's how it starts.
And you start as a math major?
No, a math interest.
Math interest. And then when you have to declare your first declared major is?
Psychology.
And that's what you end with?
Yes.
All right. And you get your bachelor's degree at Allegheny, and then what happens next?
I applied to graduate programs, and when I went to the chair of the department for a letter, he says, I'd be more than happy to write a letter, but why are you applying to clinical programs? And I said, what else is there? And I had picked those programs kind of like maybe I had picked college. I liked the name, the location. I had no clue that I was supposed to align. There was more to the thinking. And then I had the opportunity to have lunch with a speaker. It was a bunch of students. I don't know how they picked me. I wasn't, in the honors crowds and all of that, but it was a very important moment. And a smart student asked the question, what's your advice for applying to graduate school? And he said, figure out who's teaching there and then write about them in your personal statement. And she says, what? And he said, yeah, here's what I do. I go through the file. If I see my name, it's one pile. If I don't see my name, it's another pile. And it really changed the way I thought about thinking about graduate school is, I need to find people who are doing what I'm interested in. And I was very interested in language and cognition. I had done a research project. Every student had to do a senior comprehensive project. I chose a research project. I didn't want to do a library. I thought, we've done papers. I want to actually collect data. And I can't believe that my advisor let me do this. I walked in thinking, there's no way he'll let me do it. He'll laugh me out of his office. I said, I want to go down to Pittsburgh, to the Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. And I want to put words on a screen that differ in the complexity of the sign. And I want to measure their memory for these words. And I want to compare that to people who are not deaf, same words and all of that. And I got this from someone, I think his first name is John, J.D. Bonvillian. I think it was definitely UVA. So anyway, it was my first publication. But he let me do that. And if I think too much about it, I will cry because my first year, do I tell everybody this? We were 3 terms, 3 courses at a time. Mm-hmm. Everyone can do the math. 1.9 the first term, a 1.9, a 1.0 the second term. I go into my third term with a 1.45. And the first term is like, oh, well, that's average. I know what I need to do now. The second term, I had mono and never thought to withdraw. Didn't have anyone really looking out. And I had my advisor as my professor, and I went to him. He never reached out, which I didn't expect. But when I went to him before the final, I said, I just want you to know if I fail this, it's not out of any disrespect. Can you believe I went to the professor and said, this is not about you, it's
actually
about
knowing
me.
You, I do believe that.
Yeah,
of
and
course
I said,
I
have to think strategically about my study time. And I don't know if it makes sense to spend a lot of time studying for an exam, and mathematically, I can't pass the course.
Right.
And he just was like, okay, whatever.
Well, I don't know how you feel about Allegheny, and maybe you have fond memories now, but, I mean, at some point, and there's no reason to be hypercritical about it, but at some point they failed you in that they didn't tell you about your career options. If you left there thinking that's all I can do is clinical.
But I didn't leave there that way. In that moment, that
Right.
person helped me understand. And he said, no, you want to look for research programs. You love research. He says, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a professor. And I wanted to be a professor because they didn't fail me in a lot of ways. They didn't treat me any differently from the high achievers. And
Right,
that's where I
right.
can cry. That's seriously the fact that this professor who, in the chair of the department was Professor Kleins, but the person who was my advisor for my comp was Alec Dale. And I don't know if he'd be listening to this, but the fact that, this is where I'll cry, the fact that he let this, 21-year-old with this big idea go. He says, you write the IRB, or you write to them, you work all those details out. I will help you make the slides, because they were literally slides in a tray.
Yep.
I will help you recruit the matched controls from the high school, because he grew up in that community. And that was it.
Yeah,
And
but
he let me do that. So he let me do those things that I feel like anywhere else I wouldn't have been able to do, because I wasn't honors material. Because, the math is funny on GPA. It starts low, it's very hard to bring it up. Starts high, it's really hard to bring it down. And it was a real struggle. So I'm very proud of where I ended up. And it turned around
Right.
in the third term of that year, when I took Intro to Psych, and I took Human Development, and I took Rat Lab, where I got to train my rats and all of that.
But you absolutely give credit to him for seeing something in you that made the risk worth it. If you look at somebody on paper, yeah, you're looking at a 1.45. We don't let this person go out and represent our institution. But he saw something in
Right.
you. And
that 1.45 was long before I went out.
Right,
So I did
right,
have 2
right.
years to bring that
Right,
up.
but-
And obviously I got into graduate school without taking any courses beyond my bachelor's degree. So my GPA got up,
yes,
and my SATs and all of that.
Right.
But you're right. I think, but who did then? Did you get good career advice?
No, but I didn't think anything through. I had role models, and I marveled at what they did in front of the classroom, and I didn't think about, should I go into industry? What can I do with this? I just thought, I think these people teaching in front of me are awesome, and I think I'm just going to be like them.
Right. Well, I wanted to be a professor too. So somewhere in my junior year, maybe it was after that conversation when he said, "Go for it." And it had to be the spring of my junior year because it was a year-long project. I seriously doubt he would let me come in the fall and that I could have accomplished all of that in an academic year. But, I really felt like I loved college and I loved the opportunity. It seems so, I'm not a touchy-feely person, but I found myself there. I figured out things I never would have known about myself through the opportunities. Well, even it was the classroom. It was very traditional teaching, but I was inspired by what they were talking about, but I knew I wanted to be a professor. So the clinical part didn't matter to me. I just needed a degree to be a professor. So then I started thinking about the research part, and that's how I ended up. And so I talked about, like I said, I think it's John Bonvillian. I made the contact. I contacted him and said, I'd like to come meet you. And he lets me come down, gives me a tour, we chat, and he says, so you're probably applying to graduate school this year? Yep. And he says, I don't have any slots, but this is the gift he gave me. He rattled off 5 or 6 different schools. He knew my interests, and he said, these are some places I think might be a good fit for you. So what I do, I went home, I did my applications, and I sent them off. I did not end up applying to UVA. I got into Northeastern University in language and cognition. And then in a few months, my professor said, you can't do the research. I don't see how you're going to be able to do research with sign language if you're not fluent in sign language. And I scratched my head and I thought, but you knew this when I met you. And she was a language acquisition person. So I knew that her research interests were different, but I was happy to do her work to support that with the understanding I was going to be able to pursue what I wanted. My statement said what I wanted. And I didn't apply to work with her. She was a new hire. Gotcha. I applied to work with Harlan Lane, who is very well known for his research around sign language and language acquisition. So, but he wasn't taking students. I don't even think he was on campus the entire time I was there. He was living in France, I think. But yeah, so it's a lot. My story, there's all of these twists
ins
and turns.
And outs. And actually,
and we're probably going to run out of time before I get through the whole thing.
We are. So I have one thing I have to save for the end, but I know you came in with a list. I want to make sure that you get to the folks that you wanted to mention.
Well, the most important name I need to mention here's where I'm going to cry again.
You're doing fine. Just
Ted
take
Bosak.
a moment. Oh, Ted.
So my first connection to teaching psychology was at Necktop, and it happened to be at his college, and I had a poster, and I think Dana Dunn was one of the people who went around reviewing the posters to select a winner. I happened to win the poster award. I was so excited. Ted is just an amazing and supportive and kind person, and I'm sure everybody who speaks with him feels the same way.
Absolutely. But
he has been so important. When I'm giving a presentation, he shows up, and usually Barney Bynes is sitting next to him, which is also fun. But he's really been there as I've come into the teaching of psychology as someone who's learning so much about how other people do things and learning about the scholarship of teaching and learning. And he's just been, if it weren't for him and how welcoming he was at that very first meeting, I'm not sure how things would have played out. So I definitely had to give him a shout out.
It's interesting that I think a lot of people in STP can point to a welcoming person. It's not always the same welcoming person. Yesterday during ACT, a lot of people pointed to Sue France as our current president, as that's that person that, riding in on the shuttle from the airport was welcoming, or, hey, come sit with us. And so for you, that person's Ted Bosak. And so I think that's, I don't know if that's unique to our organization, but I think that's a very common story that we hear.
So there are other people. Regan was great. He came up to me at a best practices when it was best practices, and we were in Atlanta, and I had a poster. I was using The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down as a way of teaching adherence in a health psych course. And of course it was health psych and it was culture. And he came over, because that's something that he knows a lot about. And I did a SOTL workshop I can't remember the year now. I think it was 2014. And that was an incredible experience. And then there's you. And for me, we met for the first time in 2015 at Necktop. Mm-hmm. You walked up to me. I was like, what? You know who I am? You know that
I
you
did.
Yes.
Your instructional resource award, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute.
Oh, the 100-page document I put up on.
Don't diminish that.
Yeah. So that's it. And I do have to, because I'd hate for us to run out of time, I have to say I feel guilty because one of my new besties, Karen Knopfel, and someone I just met this morning, Angela Legg, and I came into this room and we took a picture of us at the microphones. And I feel bad that I'm here being interviewed and the two of them, Angela's out there, I think, but Karen's already on her way home. So hey guys, I'm representing the women that we talked about earlier today.
Over time, I'm sure they'll both be on the podcast.
Yes.
And I think Garth and I are actually pretty sensitive to, if you look over the course of the entire Psych Sessions roster, we try to be really sensitive to that. And so, in fact, we hope we're representative in terms of proportions and things like that. We really do. So
those are the most important things. I mean, there's been other people, obviously, Jamie McMinn, and he connected me with Aaron Richmond, which really changed a lot of things for me, and they've been amazing as well. So those are my people I just would feel, and there's probably others that I'm going to leave here and say, wait.
Well, don't worry about it. So we've always known that there will be repeat guests, and so you don't have to get it all in today. I promise we'll have you on again. I promise. But I want to thank you for that 100-page document that you're making fun of. It was about a consulting model for research methods, and it's a 2014 IRA Instructional Resource Award through STP, teachpsych.org, and you wrote it for research methods. I'm actually benefiting from it this semester, not for research methods, but for capstone. And so I took some of the ideas directly lifted out of that without attribution, I'm sorry to say.
Ooh, Karen, do you hear this? We've had a conversation about this. Yes.
You
Karen
mean
Knopfel. No, Karen Knopfel and I were talking about this particular meeting about, we love to share our resources. At what point do we care?
Oh, I don't think I took the actual descriptions of the. And so I actually have my capstone students in groups of 6 who are doing consulting on projects in my Department of Psychological Science. And but some of the ideas that you had in there for things like the different parts of the consulting team, the different parts of the process, rather than, in addition to searching the literature, I looked directly at that handout that you had from there, and the things that, so I enjoy learning from you. I just don't have a lot of colleagues in the country that think deeply about advising. And so every time I get a chance to talk with you, I enjoy it. I'm so impressed with MCPHS University and what you've done, commitment that you have. You can hear it in your voice. If this were video, you can see the excitement in your face when you get to talk about your students. And Stacie, thank you so much for everything that you're doing for our discipline. You're representing quite well, and please keep doing what you're doing. And thank you so much for making the time on such short notice to be part of Psych Sessions.
This is an honor. I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to sit down and chat with you for this long, and thank you so much.